Hello, this is Panic Consulting's ArcGIS workshop. I'm Frank Conkling, and this time what we're going to do is we're going to look at mapping a next-generation condominium unit in the parcel fabric. Before we start, if you want to know who we are and what we do and how we do it, go to the QR code. It'll give you an indication. If you are here live right now, please welcome. First of all, thank you for joining and helping us to make this as interactive as possible. And if you have any comments, any questions you want to ask while the session is going on, please go ahead and put them in the chat window. Chris is going and moderating the chat window. So what are we going to do today is we're going to look at condominiums, just real quickly go through a couple slides so we can explain and make sure that we all understand what a condominium is and why it's different from a land parcel. All right. So condos are different in that while with a land parcel, what we own, and I put ownership in big quotes, what we own are multiple rights. We own the rights to dig, to mine, to restrict the use, to sell and buy. In a condominium, it's very different. We don't have all those rights, and rather there's limitations on the rights. So there's only limited rights inside of condos. Also, the biggest difference is one in which with a land parcel, you basically, with some limitations, you are going from the center of the earth all the way out into space. You own below your land and you own above the land. With a condominium, that is not the case. You actually, in a condominium, only own a 3D space defined by the floor elevation, ceiling elevation, and the paint on the walls. The way in which condominiums are defined is also very different in that there's a declaration of condominium, and this declaration of condominiums is actually stored in the official record books, not in plat books as is usual with subdivisions. And that declaration of condominium, what's often referred to as the condominium docs or documents, defines the rights, the responsibilities, the limitations, what you can do as an owner, what you have access to, and what you don't have access to. So simplistically, the ownership of a condominium is defined as having the right to use a three-dimensional space. That space is paint to paint on the walls and floor to ceiling. All right, you only really can go and use that. And what you can do inside there is somewhat limited. You can paint the walls, you can knock out internal walls, you can go and even create new internal walls. But condominiums have restrictions. For example, earlier condominiums, they would restrict you from using certain types of floor coverings and such. You couldn't go and put certain types of window elements in there. You couldn't change the windows. So it's not exactly the same as a land parcel. But what happens is there's actually three different portions or definitions of units inside the condominium and who has rights and access to it. So the primary unit inside of a condominium is a condominium unit. And in this defined area, the unit owner has unlimited rights, again, within certain limitations, but the unit owner has full access to that. They can use it anytime they want, and within those rights, those limitations, they can do whatever they want in that area. And then the next one is a limited common element. Limited common element, the unit owner has limited rights to use it. They can go out there, and by the way, limited common elements are usually balconies and things that are viewable and seen from the outside. They're balconies, they can go and put furniture out there, but there's limitations on what they can do. They can't enclose it, they can't do certain other things. Limited common elements can also be parking spaces within a parking garage on there. So the unit owner has limited rights to use it, and they are exclusive to the unit owner. finally, the third type of elements inside of a condominium are general common elements. And these all unit owners have the right to use. So in a general common element, this usually consists of hallway spaces, elevator shafts, underground areas, pool areas, the parking lots, unassigned spaces in the parking lots, those sorts of things. And they're available for all the unit owners, but everybody can use those. So how do we go and map condominiums? And the mapping of condominiums has really been an evolution over the last 20, maybe 25 years. And initially, many of us didn't even think about mapping condos because they are so different. And because it was a 3D space that we're really trying to map with all these nuances in there, we often just let them go and never really looked at mapping them. Well, it's time that we start mapping them. So the first attempts were to go and maybe have some sort of one-to-one relationship where we'd have a point or something on here. Actually, there was an attempt before that in which we'd have a related table and we wouldn't even attempt to put something on our map. But these points, we would create a point every time it was supposed to have a condominium that had an interest in that overall area. And what this did is it created a separate feature classes, separate geometries to represent the area that they were going to be looking at, or they were going to have ownership rights in. Sometimes the points were stacked on top of one another. Sometimes the points were scattered. And I often describe condominiums using a breakfast metaphor. And this could be thought of as a grape nuts model. Just a bunch of little points all over, really not satisfying as far as really getting close to what spaces are defined and actually mapping what they are. But it was a first attempt. And so the next one was thinking about, well, if we want to do more than just points, and we want to represent some areas. So a lot of property assessors started looking at using polygons, moving beyond points. And because this was the same geometry as parcels, you could actually put them into the same feature class, and you would have one single feature class that had all your tax parcels in it. And you could have one single export that had everything in. The problem was with polygons, with just regular polygons, it didn't follow the actual unit dimensions that these condo units actually had. And again, in building on this breakfast metaphor, there were two ways that we would do this. And this was probably a decade ago we started doing this. We would have pancakes or we'd have waffles. And let me explain. So a pancake, and this seemed to be the most widely accepted way in which we mapped condominiums. A pancake would just take the land parcel and stack it on top of itself so that we'd have stacked parcels, and it would be the base polygon representing the entirety of the common elements. And then on top of that, you'd have the areas or these land parcels that would represent, oh, this portion of this appraisal would go to a unit owner. No attempts to go and map limited common elements or any of the other elements in here. Just let's at least put some polygon out there. And as I said, this seemed to be the most widely accepted one because it was easiest one to do. As soon as we had gotten rid of the topology rule that says that parcels can't overlap, we started looking at building this. And this is a really good interim step. The other way in which people started to do was they said, well, we don't like representing all of these on a single land parcel. Instead, we want to go and represent a little bit closer to the overall area of the individual condo units. So what would happen is they would take a polygon, often it would be a building polygon, and they would just split it up into the specific number of units that were in that building. Didn't matter what the geometries were of those, other than they were polygons. And they would use each one of those little cells, or using the breakfast metaphor, each one of those little cells in the waffle would represent a unit. Again, it would be the unit, but it would not be any limited common elements. It wasn't a good representation of the area, or when we started looking at 3D, it did not represent any views or what side of the building it was on or anything. It was just a next evolutionary step in identifying and trying to map where condominiums are and how to represent them on our maps. The next step was one in which we started recognizing that parcels do have, or excuse me, that in fact our condominium units have 3 dimensions to them. And whether we were using Pancakes or Waffles, what we started doing is looking at adding some attribution that would represent either elevation or floor elements on here. These are very easy, and we actually have several counties, several of our clients, that this is the way they represent condominiums. Not a bad way to do it, but it's still not the best way, or the not next generation way of doing it. And the problem with it is that it doesn't actually represent the area of the units. You really can't start doing locational searches or view sheds or anything like that on this, because it really is nothing more than just a polygon of some sort on here. There is no representation of limited common elements, the ones that are ancillary to the unit owners, again, with limited rights on them, but there's nothing attempting to represent those. And there is nothing representing the general common elements, which are actually the responsibility of the condominium association. So again, another evolutionary step, still problems associated with it. So where do we go from here? This is sort of the next combination where you would have stacked units in the parcel fabric, and these could be approximations of the unit boundary. No common elements, no limited common elements, nothing on here, but you could at least kind of represent where these things are. And it was a nice step. This is an interim step, though, and we found that in representing condominiums in this manner, by the time you got to this part, having to go and define where the unit was and defining the elevation or the floor space on there, you might as well go all the way and start really modeling it, modeling what the actual condo has. And this is where the complexity kicks in, as far as how do you model the actual condo unit. So in here, we actually have an area here. Now this area, for example, and these are really big condominiums. This condominium is defined basically by this white area here, which goes all the way around, with the exception of the pink and the orange areas in here. This is the condo unit. This in here is the condo unit. And so you wind up creating a polygon for that. But then you also have the limited column elements. The common elements in this one condominium unit are the balconies, one here, one here, one here. All right. You'd have to represent those, because those are part of the assessed value of the condominium unit, but they're not represented very often. And then finally, you have the general common elements, which all the actual owners in the condominium have a right to use: the stairwells, the elevator shafts, all of them. You have to go and model those. And, it's once you understand it, it's like, it's not difficult. It's just a little bit more time consuming because we're now not generally modeling our land. We are actually beginning to get more and more detail into this. However, let's get in here. However, there's other complexities built in. For example, do we actually model anywhere the infrastructure that resides between the units? We generally say it's the common elements, but that's not true because you still have, for example, you have the space between the ceiling of one unit and the floor of the next. So from a three-dimensional representation, you have to be careful in what you're representing in here. Also, inside of these units, you want to make sure that you don't include the interior walls, but you only include the limits of the actual condo unit in there. So, for example, here's a sample condo in which, and it depends upon how intensive you want to go and build it out. You can build out the overall extent of the boundary, the exterior boundary, and include that. But then you have the limited common elements, which is the balcony here. And you want to include that general common elements also. So I guess my point on all this is just to say that recognize that it's something we should aspire to, and it's something we should be trying to map because the general public is going to be looking for us to do better and better as far as where these actual taxable areas are. Who owns this? How can we see where it is? And as we start using our parcel data for more things beyond just assessment, we also have to start looking at things like, what about the view of a parcel? What about shadow studies on buildings as they're going up? What about flood zones? What about slush models, which go in and determine, or at least model, where the flooding might occur as a result of some of these natural disasters that are going on? All of that we need to start thinking about when we start considering looking at not just land parcels, but also these other types of ownership that we have. So how might we map it? How might we map it? And in here, what I'm proposing is that we map basically the representation of the unit itself, the unit and the actual exclusive condominium unit. And then we can also go and map the general common elements in here also on here. And if we want to, we can also map the limited common elements, the actual balconies and things of that sort. So there's a way in which you can map those. But again, as with everything, as with land parcels, there's more complexities. What happens when you have multi-story units? Until we find out, or until we can get some way to represent a 3D model besides just say 2.5D extrusion, we're going to have to hold off on multi-story units. Maybe we have to do one map representation for each of these stories and make it a multi-part polygon. You have to find a way to do this, though, eventually. And again, this is evolutionary. Well, with ArcGIS Pro 3.1, Esri actually came up with a way for us to go and start to build these three-dimensional models. And I say three, but they're really not 3D. They're actually 2.5D. They have some extrusion, some vertical extrusion, but they really don't represent true 3D on there. And so what these strata parcels do is they represent the floor elevation on there. And interestingly, Esri has analyzed this and said, not only do we have to represent the floor elevation on the polygons, on the parcels themselves, but we also should represent the elevation or the floor information on the lines. Why do we do that? Well, we do that because as you move up in the floors, you get some exclusivity, and each unit on top and below may not be exactly the same configuration. So for each of these polygons, for each of these parcels, you're going to have its own unique representation of the lines that we use to generate it. So that when you start thinking about strata parcels, when you start thinking about, and you could just replace strata with condo, about condo parcels in here, you want to recognize you want to do it on all the polygons and all the lines for which you're going to do 3D and 3D extrusion. And on there, you're also going to want to contain not just floor elevation, but think about whether or not you want to contain some elevation model. Floor information is the minimum you need to create a strata parcel inside the parcel fabric. And one of the projects we're working on, we have the condo units in here, and that has lines and polygons associated with it. But then we also have a separate parcel type for limited common elements, LCEs, and one for general common elements, GCEs. A nuance of this is that the condominium unit and the limited common element, they have the ownership of the unit owner is attached to that. But the general common element is not necessarily related to the condo unit. They are more related to the condo association. They're the responsibility of the association. So there's different rights or different ownerships between the condo unit, LCE, and the general common element on here. Another nuance. So if you want to go and map this inside the RTS parcel fabric, what you have to do is you have to add these required attribute fields, and it must be added to the line and polygon feature class for each of the parcel types for which you're going to try to build units. If you keep them in land parcels, just be aware that you're then going to have it on all land parcels. We talked about it. We decided to have the condos as a separate parcel type that then gets appended to the land parcels for any export or any publication. The required attribute field is a floor order, not floor number, not floor designation, floor order. It is a long integer value. And it is recommended that that's how you do it. We also recommend that you include the floor elevation and the ceiling elevation for future extrusion so that you can use this. And again, these can be floating point, doubles, whatever you want. The only one you definitely have to have is you have to have floor order as a long integer in here. So how does this work? When you go to build the actual unit, you build it like any other parcel. You go in there, you draw the lines, you build it, and then once you've got the attribution in there correct, you can then go and use a duplicate parcels. Previous to this latest iteration of the software, we would use a function called duplicate vertical, and that would go and duplicate the parcels on top of one another, but it wouldn't do any sort of sequential numbering or anything for the floor order. With this latest release and the ability to do strata parcels, it will list your long integer in there and say, okay, I want to do floor order. How many times do I want to stack this parcel? And then what's my starting value? What's my increment on there? So you have that option to go and build it and stack it now, and I'm going to demonstrate that. The only other thing that we want to look at is, by the way, we have the data extrusion to 3D, really 2.5D, so that we can at least see what these buildings look like in 3D scenes and look at them. That's where some of the real value is. There's also a range slider. Range slider is an interesting addition to ArcGIS Pro in that it shows you or provides the ability to go and limit what's shown according to one of the attributes on there. So you can go and have it go and display all of these features that match a certain criteria. In this case, it could be elevation, it could be floor order, it could be anything, but it gives you the ability to do this. If you're currently using the ArcGIS parcel fabric, you can think of this as an advanced show active only. It's the same sort of component on here. So let's go and build this and see if there's, what it's like to go and actually work on this. All right. What I have here is I have a parcel fabric, and I'm just going to do the condo units in here. And I've simplified this, and then I've put them all into one condo unit. And I have condo types for units, limited common elements, general common elements. I have a record that I've created on here, and I've actually input lines in here to sort of show you what this might be. These larger rectangles, that's a unit. This is a condo unit. This is a condo unit. This one area hanging off of this on the outside is probably a limited common element. And this long one here is probably a corridor. Could be internal, could be external, but it's a corridor, which would be a general common element on here. So how does one build this? It's not very tough to do. We would go and say, draw the line, create a record, draw the lines defining where these individual units would be, and then we would simply go and create seeds for them and let it go and create the seeds for those areas on the first level that we're going to be marking on here. All right. So obviously it looks like I have a couple seeds in here. Oh, I've got multiple lines in here. Let's go and look at this, what I've got here. Condo units. I actually have here. I had taken my lines and I had gone and had them on multiple levels. So you can see here, I can have floor order. And for each of these, I had a separate set of lines so that when I went to build this, it analyzed every single set of lines on here. And then from that, built a seed for it. When I go to build this, let's see what it actually goes and builds. By the way, if you have any questions or comments, please put them over in the chat window. I don't see anything on there right now, but let's see what happens. All right, I have a series of units that have been built now. When I look at this, I have these units. Right now, these units have no attribution on there because none of them are set. Let's go ahead and set them all as being condo units on here. Those are all condo units. Let's look in here and we'll define those as being limited common elements in here. All right, let's look at this area here. On here, I have on these lines, I have no floor order set. Should I be able to go and edit this and create a parcel without this? Probably. I'm not quite sure why. It might be that I have a gap in somewhere in here. Haven't really looked at it that closely on here. Let me try this again just to create the seeds. Let's make sure that that actually was all part of, they are part of my actual record. You could tell I was playing around with this beforehand. Let's go and trick this a little bit. Let's create a unit here. All right. Ah, here's the reason why. I went and enabled the range on here, and I have not set any range values on any of this. So let's go and select these lines. Select this line, and at least set them with a range order of my lines as being here, floor order. Let's make it 1. All right. Let's see if that will allow me to go and at least create seeds on here, because this is range order. Nope. Obviously need to have additional lines in here. Make sure. Did I actually have any 1s on there? I don't think I did. Sorry. I think I may have started on floor order of 2. Yep. So if I have a range order established, it looks on that range order of what it's actually going to go and analyze and considers that inside of here. Let's just go and build these 2, and let's duplicate vertical on here. So this is my second floor units. All right, let's go ahead and let's look at these, and let's at first just go and make them units. And let's take this one and make this the general common element. So these units here, I have multiples. I actually have 5 of them. This one, I only have 1 of them. Let's go and show you how to duplicate these and set them up. So if I go and click on duplicate here, it says, okay, it's going to go and sequence the floor order. And I want to repeat it, in this case, 4 times. And I want to start, oh, it already identified that it was at 2. So, and I want to go and start on 3 and go from there. So it's gone and duplicated these now. With that, if I select them all, I have 5 units. Each of them, here's unit 2, floor level 2, floor level 3, floor level 4, 5, and 6. So I have all of these built now. I don't have parcel IDs or anything else as part of this, but I at least have these polygons built. If I wish to go and limit what I actually see here, I can go down and say, well, let's only show, 1 level here. And let's see. Go in and try this. Here's 0 to 1, here's 1 to 2. If I go in here and do a select now, I only have those that are showing for 2. I can go in here and say, two to 3 here. Here's my 2 and my 3 on here. So I can control what's visible and what I can select from at any time by using a range order. How does one enable a range order? So if I go and click on my layer, which I have my range order, and I go to the properties of that, there actually is here a range in which I can go and tell it what the actual attribute field is that's going to be the limiting factor or the area in which we go and show it on here. I could remove that and I can add a different one if I have a different long integer field that I want to go in and use for my representation of these. All right. So on here, And let's go and test them all. Let's get everything here. And let's do everything here. And let's sequential number these just so we can see that there is duplicate parcels here. And this is our condominium units. And we can do it in a name field. And let's just add that a little. And we're going to start at 1. And we'll increment by 1. All right. As I go through here, it will go and do this. Let's make sure it's labeling. Let's also set our label properties over here so that when we look at position and the override, duplicate is set, do not remove. And if we look at, where is that here? Unplaced, never remove them. Should be able to go in here and buffer. Run. Interesting. I'm not quite sure how to go and set it up so it doesn't repeat that. But we do have all of these now built. Our next step, and I'm not going to cover it this time, but the next step would be go to export it out and then extrude this and look at it. Let's see if I can go in and do one more thing though. Let's go and see if we can actually put in place here a new view and create this view and convert this to a local scene. By the way, this is on the fly. Haven't done any extrusion, haven't done anything on here. Let's go ahead and put these next to one another. Let's also make sure that this is linked up. Link up here. See, what is it? This one, I think. No. Which is the one that lets me, it's zoom in, zoom out. And this one must be the overall. Not figured out how to go and extrude this yet or how to go and do that. Anyway, I'm not going to spend any more time just experimenting with this. But in fact, this is the way to start modeling your condominium units and creating the next generation of condo units. Do we have any comments, any questions on this?
Not in the chat, but I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Does sequential numbering take floor order into consideration? In what order will it number each individual unit is basically the umbrella question that I'm asking.
So that's a really good question. I don't know. So unit number 1 actually was floor order 5. Unit number 2 was 2. 3 is 3. 4 is 4. 5 is 6. So it
looks like they're all corresponding to their floor other than 1 and 6.
Yeah, 1 and 2 here. These were the 2 first ones. And then this is unit 7. Again, these, because it was sequential, it just kept adding it on.
Uh-huh.
Instead of resetting it, I probably, if I go in here now, let's clear this out. Let's go back to sequential. All right. And sequential numbering here. Go back here and reset it to 1. And actually it should be reset to 2 because it starts at 2. Sequential is 1, and just contain it inside of here. And let's see what the attribution is on this. Got them all here. 2 is unit 2. 3 is unit 3. 4 is unit 4. It looks like that's exactly what it does, Chris.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, the labeling is different, but as far as the attribution for sequential numbering, it does look like it takes into account the actual floor order when it's going and building those. Great catch. Good point. Any other comments? No. All
None that
right.
I can see.
All right. I'm going to go and stop the recording.